All right, we do have some breaking news, some brand new numbers on inflation, up both month to month and year to year. Let's get right to CNN's Zain Asher. Zain, what are you seeing here and what role do tariffs play in this?
So these are interesting numbers, right? Because this is pretty much exactly in line with expectations. We were expecting 0.3% month over month. Guess what we got? Exactly 0.3%. What I think is interesting is that we are seeing a slight increase in terms of rising prices from these tariffs. This is actually, by the way, a 5-month high, but it's not the sort of catastrophe that people had been anticipating. Fed Chair Jerome Powell had said a number of times that the June CPI data was going to be critical. The summer inflation data is going to be critical in terms of figuring out what the Fed does as it pertains to monetary policy in this country. So the question is, what do they do with a number like this? It's a slight increase, but it's not dramatic. Remember, June is the first full month after a lot of the sweeping tariffs came into effect. Tariffs against Canada, tariffs against Mexico, the EU, steel, aluminum, a number of consumer imports. And so this is why the Fed is watching this data very, very closely. What I think is interesting is what it tells us is that perhaps businesses are absorbing some of these costs, so they're not necessarily passing them on to consumers just yet. Also, the issue of front loading. Remember, we talked about front loading along with the retail sales data. This idea that when people knew that the April 2nd Liberation Day was about to come online, that they stocked up, not just consumers, by the way, John, businesses as well, stocked up on goods back then. They're not necessarily needing to buy those goods again just yet. And I think the third thing is, remember, we've seen so many stops and starts as it pertains to these trade war. 90-day pauses on certain tariffs. The worst of the tariffs only came into effect very briefly, and then they were paused. So remember that before this data point, a lot of people were anticipating that there would be a September rate cut. I think the jury is still out as it pertains to what the Fed does with this number. Remember, it's just one data point, a slight increase, and there are more tariffs that are about to set into effect. You know that the August 1st deadline.
We have new deadlines.
New deadline. It's so hard to
now.
keep track. Yes, exactly.
What do the markets think about all this so
Let's
far?
take a look and see where futures are. I think that, look at it. It's just pretty much flat. What does the markets do with a number like this? I think that what the markets really do want to see at this point in time is that, of course, they do want some kind of rate cut. Again, with this particular piece of data, it's still too early to tell what exactly the Fed's going to do come September. But I do think that Donald Trump does feel emboldened to continue this trade war, especially when you think about the markets are at record highs. And also, we're not necessarily seeing the effect of this trade war in the hard data just yet.
All right, Zain Asher, thank you very much for this. Markets open in a little bit. We'll see where they go after that bell rings.
Your money. Inflation rebounding in June as higher prices, including those from tariffs, are packing a bigger punch. This is the highest level of inflation in 4 months. The report also serving as a crucial point for Fed Chair Jerome Powell as he weighs the potential for rate cuts. So let's go live now to CNN business and politics correspondent Vanessa Yurkevich in New York. What's going on here? What's costing us more, Vanessa?
Yeah, Pamela, inflation heating up in the month of June. The numbers coming in as expected, but analysts were expecting a pickup in inflation, and that's exactly what we saw last month. You had inflation year over year rising to 2.7%, on a monthly basis rising 0.3%. And there were a couple key categories that were leading the way in terms of why prices were rising. Number one, shelter. That was the biggest share of why prices rose in the month of June. That is the most that Americans usually pay every month, things like rent, for example. Also, food at home, grocery store prices holding steady at 0.3%. And then gas prices, a really significant pickup after falling by 2.6% in the month of May, picking up by a whole percentage point in the month of June. We saw gas prices rise last month, largely because of the conflict that was happening with Israel and Iran. Categories also that we are paying close attention to, because Pamela, this report will not be explicit and say, yes, tariffs are causing prices to increase. But look at these categories on your screen. These are items that historically have been imported into the United States. Furniture and apparel up 0.4%. Toys up 1.8%. 80% of all toys imported into the United States come from China, which is currently facing a 30% tariff. And then appliances. These are bigger ticket items that are largely imported, up
up 1.9%. But we did see some prices falling on key categories that we saw Americans buying a lot of before the tariffs went into effect. Look at that. Used vehicles and new vehicles falling in price because so much front loading was happening ahead of the tariffs. And then airline fares, something to watch, down just slightly, 0.1%, but that could be a sign that consumers are starting to pull back on travel. Of course, this month of June is backwards looking. This data is backwards looking. Many analysts believe that we will really start to see the higher prices because of tariffs in July. And as you mentioned, Pamela, because of all of this, what will the Federal Reserve do in the next few weeks? According to many analysts that I've been speaking with this morning, it really takes the possibility of a rate cut off the table later this month, because the Federal Reserve wants to make sure that inflation is not going to continue to accelerate before they cut rates. Remember, 2.7% is moving even farther away, Pamela, from the Federal Reserve's 2% target that they're trying to hit, Pamela.
Yeah, important context. Vanessa Yurkevich, thank you.